Hey, what's going on this week? I'm geeking out a little bit. It's my favorite author. If you've ever seen the movie 21 or The Social Network, his books inspired those big screen blockbusters. It's Ben Mezrich. His most recent book, Bitcoin Billionaires, is being made into a movie. We talk about that and also his upcoming NFT project that gives you the opportunity to own a piece of his movie forever. That's coming up next. Stick around. So where are you located right now? Are you East Coast?
I am in Vermont at the moment. We are Boston based normally, but for the pandemic, we ran up north. So I've been in the Vermont mountains for a year and a half now, but we go back and forth to Boston.
Oh yeah, I remember I read an article that you had mentioned that being in Boston, those cold winters really force you to focus and write books and not have anything else to do. Just eliminate distractions.
I'll tell you, Vermont is 10 times that. You're
Really?
in Vermont, you really can write a lot here. You know, I've been more productive in the past year than in the previous 5 years. So absolutely.
So did you always know that you wanted to be a writer? Because you went to Harvard, you had a really great upbringing, very academic, graduated magna cum laude. Was writing what you just from the get-go, that was your thing?
Yeah, I mean, since I was 12, really, or 11 or 12, I've wanted to be a writer. So this is pretty much all I've ever wanted to do. So I was fortunate that it worked out and that I got to do what I wanted to do for sure.
Were you
Yeah.
writing any type of books when you were younger?
Yeah. So basically, when I was a little kid, my parents had a rule that we had to read 2 books a week before we were allowed to watch TV. So starting at a very young age, I became obsessed with books because I wanted to watch television. It had nothing to do with books initially. So I basically started writing at a very young age. I didn't know how one became a writer. You know, my dad is a doctor, my mom is a lawyer. So I didn't come from a family where anybody wrote or did anything artistic. But by the time I arrived in college, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And it was just a matter of figuring out how do you break into this field and how do you get here? So
That's funny. I have a similar rule with my son because nowadays, I mean, I'm 40. I grew up in like Nintendo was a big deal. My son loves Roblox. So I make him read. I think that like the biggest thing we don't teach kids is financial literacy. So I have my 10-year-old reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad with by Robert Kiyosaki and before he plays Roblox. So yeah, it's funny. So now he's in school and he just got voted CEO of this like class project they're doing because he's the only one that knows the difference between an asset and a liability. But I think that kids don't read as much anymore nowadays as they did when back in the day. I mean, which is surprising.
yeah, I mean, video games. You know, listen, if we had the video games then that exist today, I wouldn't. I would have just played video games all day long.
You'd be a
Too.
game developer instead of
I
a
mean, when I
writer.
was a kid, the games were so lame, right? And they eventually got better and better, but now they're very appealing. So I get it. I have 2 kids, you know, are 9 and 11, and my son, Roblox, Fortnite, all of these things. They're just very appealing. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
funny.
totally understand it. Yeah,
You grew
yeah.
up in the what was the Atari era, right? With Pong, and you have
I
like
mean, I grew up in multiple, eras, but basically, I'm older than you. I'm 52 now. So when I first started, there was nothing. Then there was Atari, and then I got into Nintendo. Also, N64 was my thing in my 20s. I was obsessed with Nintendo 64. Yeah.
so when you graduated college, what was your first foray into writing books and getting them published, where this was now a living for you?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I graduated from college, and I said, "This is what I want to do. I want to be a writer." But I don't know what that means. My parents were not excited about this prospect, and so they basically said, "We're not going to let you starve for a year, but in a year you have to prove that you're going in the right direction, or you're going to have to go to graduate school." So basically, I locked myself in an apartment in Boston, and I wrote 9 novels the year that I graduated from college, which I don't recommend to anybody. But I wrote round the clock. I would send it out, get rejection, send it out, get rejection. And I got 190 rejection slips in that year. I used to have them taped to all my walls like a serial killer. I mean, I was obsessive trying to break in. Eventually, an editor took pity on me and said, "I'm not going to, publish any of this stuff, but go read John Grisham, go read Michael Crichton, and try and write like that." And so my first actual book that I sold was in sort of the thriller, medical thriller, science thriller realm, but nobody read it. It didn't sell any copies. I eventually caught the attention of the X-Files television show, if you remember the X-Files,
Sure.
and they hired me to write for them. So I wrote a book called Skin about Mulder and Scully, and And I wrote a book that became a TV movie called Fatal Error, which really horrible TV movie that used to air on the Sci-Fi Channel at 2 a.m. But I didn't really break into writing until I met the MIT kids, this group of college kids who were gamblers, who were going to Vegas every weekend. And I met them in a bar. I started hanging out with them. They all had tons of money, and it was always in $100 bills, which you never see in Boston. So it was kind of unique. And so I really wanted to know why they had all this money. And it turns out they were the MIT blackjack team. And that's what led to my first book that anybody read, which was Bringing Down the House, which became the movie 21. So yeah.
So Bringing Down the House, you wrote that. That was my first exposure to you and your writing style. And I came from a family too, where my dad was a professional card player. So I was always very enthralled with like the math and the edges and stuff like that. And I read your book 2 or 3 times. It was one of the first books I actually read more than once. And so that book was 2002. The movie didn't come out until 2008. Do you think there was such a long gap between the book becoming this huge success and the movie actually getting made?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, in Hollywood, 5 years is considered a good amount of time between a book to a movie, which seems incredibly long. But the problem is that once you're adapting a project, there's so many more people involved. And with that project specifically, the way that project happened was, you know, I was sitting at home. I had written the book, but it hadn't come out yet. I had written an article for Wired magazine about the MIT team and how they had beat the game of blackjack. And Kevin Spacey read the article. And at the time, Kevin Spacey was a good thing, not a bad thing. And Kevin read it and said, I want to make this into a movie. And the screenwriter came in, and the first draft of the screenplay wasn't, you know, great. And it kept going back and forth. Had it not been for Kevin, the movie would not have been made at all. He kept pushing because he wanted to play the professor character. And eventually we got a good enough script that got us to that next step. So it took, I would say, 5 years, which was not unusual. The book became an explosive bestseller, but it was not expected to be a bestseller. You know, when I had sold the book, Vegas wasn't hot yet. This was before Chris Moneymaker had won the World Series of poker. So Vegas was not really on the map in 2002 when that book came out. And so the first printing was going to be 12,000 copies. It was a nothing of a book. And then I got on the Today Show, and it hit a chord, and that book just sold and sold and sold. And so, you know, the movie steamrolled off of that, but it took some time to get the right script together, to get the right cast together, and to get it made. But, you know, it was a really fun process. I got to be on set for the whole thing. We shot in Vegas. I remember we stayed at the Planet Hollywood for a month and a half. And it was me and a bunch of card counters and all these actors, because the card counters were all basically involved in the production. So it was a really, really cool process where we were getting kicked out of casinos as we were filming.
You know how many people probably started card counting after reading that book with the simple plus and minus method? I know I was one of them, and yeah. I was on a Carnival cruise about 2 years ago, and they were doing single deck blackjack, and just from a very simple plus minus system, and it's based off of that book. I was making these little wagers, and then I started making large wagers, and just haphazardly, like not with a system.
Did you win?
I did. I'm a huge poker fan. I play poker a tremendous amount, and since I started playing poker, I stopped doing gambling because I consider poker having a little more ability based than gamble. But occasionally when I go play blackjack, I either do one of two things. I'll either play once or twice a year, and it's just one big bet, roll the dice once, because the longer you play, the worse your odds are. Or I'll sit there and I'll just get a couple drinks in me, and I'll go 1 + 1, 2, 4, 9, 8, 6, 3. It's plus 14, 500, 500, 500. So like I do this, and then the pit boss comes over and is watching, and then 2 minutes later, the next pit boss comes over and watches, and then about 5 minutes later, they close the table down. I think your book was single-handedly the reason that that Vegas has now kept more eyes on card counters. Did you get it?
I used to fly to Vegas, and back then, you know, people had paperback books, and everyone would have a copy of that book going to Vegas. There was a period in time, and I always worried how many lives I ruined, because the reality is, as you know, to do it well, you have to really practice. You have to have a real affinity for counting. And it's simple math, you know, it's plus minus, like you say, but keeping track of it all in your head, you know, all night long and grinding it out it takes a lot of work. So most people go in and try it, you know, for 10 minutes and then just throw all their
Right.
money in. So you have to be very, very sort of obsessive about the numbers to get it right.
And the MIT guys, not only were they naturally brilliant and had a more adept system, but they were working in teams where it wasn't just what happens at one table. They'd have 3 or 4 tables, a bunch of people. It was really a great system in place to really maximize the money they made.
Yeah,
So
you had a real edge if you were using every table in the house, and just moving the big money to the big tables just made a big difference. Yeah.
so how did you do your due diligence? You meet them at the bar, they tell you this crazy story, and at what point were you like, this needs to be a book? And then what was your process?
Yeah, so I started going to Vegas with them, though at the time I wasn't writing nonfiction. I was not a journalist. I was someone who wrote like, X-Files stuff. I wrote pop sci-fi kind of stuff. But I convinced them to sort of let me tag along. So I started going to Vegas every weekend with them. I got very close to them. I was, interviewing pit bosses on the other side. I was just having a great time. I was carrying the money. I used to have a duffel bag with like $1 million in cash and chips, and you would show up and hide it under the table while you went swimming in the pool, and then you'd go play blackjack. So I really sort of, and then to write it, I actually went to Vegas and stayed in a different hotel night room every night for 3 weeks. And I wrote that book in 3 weeks. So I did it all in Vegas, like living like the MIT blackjack team. And it was just kind of a very sort of dive in and be a part of it process more than, journalism, because that I never learned how to do journalism correctly. And yeah, that was it. I wanted to be a part of the story, and I've carried that along in all of my nonfiction. When I dive into a story, I try and become a part of it. I become that fly on the wall and joining the characters as they do whatever it is they're doing.
That's kind of akin to like in the acting profession. There's that like the day of the life. Like people are like method actors. They get it. They just jump in with both feet. Do you think that gives you a better perspective on what's going on when you're really as hands on as possible?
Well, it's that, and it's also, in real life, I'm terrified of everything, and I live in like a hole in a bunker. And the writing is what allows me to go out and be all of these things that I could never be in real life. I mean, it is very much like actors who take on the persona of the characters they play. I want to be a Winklevi twin. I would like to go and live like the people that I write about. So it affords me the opportunity to do so. At the same time, I'm scared of everything, so I don't do super dangerous things. I've been in fairly dangerous situations in my journalism before, but it's something I try to avoid. The Vegas story was a blast, and it was really just, going to Vegas every weekend and get on the plane on Friday and come back on Sunday, and all of that was incredible. Some of my later stories get more intricate and scary as you research them, but really it's living through the lives of my characters, at least for a very brief period of time. Just gets me out of the house and gets me able to do it in an active way. I mean, let's be honest, writing is a incredibly boring profession. Sitting in your room and actually writing for 3 months is torture. And anybody who does it has to admit that the actual writing is torture, but the getting the story, the being part of the story, and that's very exciting and fun. And so that's the part that, I gravitate to as much as I can.
So when you were in Vegas with the guys from the MIT card counting crew, they were still very much in the middle of hustling these casinos, or was this when it stopped and they were going back just to show you kind of how it worked?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, not a lot of them. The main character, for instance, he really couldn't get away with walking into a casino and betting big at that point. He would get kicked out or backroomed or whatever. A lot of them had already been sort of thrown out of Vegas, but there were a few that could still get away with it. So in some respects, they were just showing me what it is they had done, but they were still carrying their big amount of money. They were still playing for real money. It was all real, but it wasn't the height of the team, which had happened a few years before that particular team. And there's still currently an MIT blackjack team. So this hadn't ended. I mean, it goes on every year. There's a new class that tries to do it. And there's a bankroll that travels from class to class. People invest from the previous group can invest in the next group. So this still goes on. But the group that I was with that I wrote about had kind of, come and gone. Their season was ending. So they wanted to show me how it had worked. Yeah.
Do they just get burned with being kind of caught too many times or too many suspicious bets?
Well, I mean, a detective, who worked for a number of the casinos followed them back to Boston, got a hold of all the yearbooks and got pictures of every MIT kid and would run it through the recognition software, the facial recognition software. So it was very difficult to be an MIT kid and get away with it at that point in time. Yeah, so they have to bring in a new crop of students each time, and that sort of thing. So once you've played a while, you do get pegged and you can't get away with it, especially if you're the big player. If you're the guy who's actually doing the betting, and the guys who are just doing the counting, and if you remember, someone sits at the table and keeps track of the cards and then signals in the guy who's the big player who sits down and makes the bets. The guys who are counting can get away with it for a lot longer because nobody really notices what they're doing. It's all about whether you vary your bet or not. You know, if you raise or lower your bet, you're going to get caught. And if you're just walking around putting big money here, big money there, you won't get caught right away. But eventually, someone's going to notice that you're always winning.
Yeah, and then they shut you down at the carnival table. That's what I was doing. $5 bets across 4 spaces, and then it was $200 bets, and then it was back to $5 bets.
Right. You'll get caught doing that fairly quickly.
Yeah, it was. But $1,000 was $1,000. You know.
Right, exactly. If you stay at $25, $50 a hand, no one's going to bother you. But once you get to $250, $500 a hand, it can happen pretty quickly.
Do the methods that the current card counting teams use, are they still, from your understanding, the same kind of methodology as before, just new faces, don't break an old system that's not broken?
You know, so the plus minus system is simple. There might be better systems, but that's the easiest to train a team with. And you need simplicity because you're going to be doing it 48 straight hours in the middle of the night for days and days, and that's the key. I believe there are other teams with other methods. I definitely know I wrote a book called Busting Vegas, which was kind of a sequel to Ringing Down the House, where this team used advanced methods such as cutting to aces, which is a really neat trick where you can actually get an ace to come out to you as the dealer deals it. Things like that, which some of the advanced teams would do.
So how hands-on were you with writing the actual script for that movie particularly?
So I did not write the screenplay for that. I was a consultant on it basically. So for 21, the screenwriter came out to Boston, come out and hung out with us. And we had a lot of meetings, and I was, in the rooms for all of the readings. I was on set for the whole shoot. So it wasn't, usually what happens is you sell the project to a studio, they bring in a screenwriter. The screenwriter will talk to you and get info from you, do their own research, use your research, and then write the screenplay. You might see drafts of it and that sort of thing. But I wasn't involved in writing that screenplay or The Social Network. I mean, Aaron Sorkin is an absolute genius. So I wasn't going to write any of that screenplay. He came out to Boston as well, and I would hand him chapters as I wrote that book. So I've been involved in that respect as sort of a, someone who I basically do the research, and they use me and my book as their research to then craft the screenplay.
So Aaron Sorkin and the movie The Social Network, based on the Accidental Billionaires, that was a pretty quick turnaround in terms of the book came out and then boom, the movie came out. Was that kind of being done in tandem?
Yeah, that was a crazy experience. So what happened was, I was sitting at home. I got a random email at 2 a.m. And this was after Bringing Down the House had come out, right before the movie 21 had come out. And it was a college kid writing me, who found me on my website basically, and wrote me an email and said, my best friend founded Facebook and no one's ever heard of him. And, I'd heard of Mark Zuckerberg, but I'd never heard of anybody else. And it was Eduardo Saverin came to me and proceeded to tell me this crazy story. And I had written a book proposal, which was 14 pages long, which had leaked onto the internet. Gawker had published my book proposal. And that caused all this craziness to happen. Aaron Sorkin saw it and said, I want to make this into a movie. David Fincher, the director, saw it and said, I want to direct this and I want to do it right now because who knows if Facebook will be around in a year. So because this was, you got to remember, this was 2007. This was before Facebook was the monster that it is today. So I hadn't actually written the book, but already had this huge movie deal with this incredible writer. So Aaron Sorkin came to Boston and I wrote the book in about 9 to 11 weeks. And I would hand him the chapters as I went. And he was, took it all together. I introduced him to all the people that I had interviewed. I had spent a lot of time with Eduardo at that point, and the Winklevi twins, who I found on Facebook, actually. That's how I linked up with them. And I started meeting with them. And Aaron wrote this incredible script. And he wrote it, basically started writing it while I was writing the book, and then finished it over the next 3 weeks after the book was finished. So yeah, it happened fast. That movie came out a year, basically simultaneous with the book, which is completely insane. That never happens. It happened quick because Fincher and Sorkin were ready to go, wanted to do it right away. And they were, they wanted this story out before anybody else could do it, or had even heard it, or before Facebook went away, in case it did. And so it was explosive. I mean, it was one of those situations where, we were shooting the movie while I was on book tour. It completely crazy situation. And just a brilliant movie. What those guys did with it was just, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I think it just got voted the #3 best movie of the century, that kind of thing. So it's awesome. Yeah, it was a great process.
So when you have a situation like that where the book is coming out almost simultaneously as the movie, does that help or hinder the book sales?
Well, I mean, the book was a very successful book. The hardcover came out, right before the movie, and it did very well. It was, it was a bestseller for many weeks in many countries. And then the movie comes out, and then you sell a lot more. When a movie comes out, you usually sell like 1 million copies or something like that. So it's, the movie, you have to remember the advertising budgets is where the big difference comes. I mean, on a book, your advertising budget is about $20,000, no exaggeration. And then when you get a movie, the advertising budget is, $100 million, right? Or whatever it is, whatever the budget was. So it's just a whole different scale of attention you get. 21 had that mass market paperback, sold 1 million copies of that alone. And Social Network was similar to that. So yeah, you sell a lot of books when a movie comes out in general.
So after you wrote 21, I was reading an interview you did, and you get inundated with every college kid and their mother that's ever done a crazy story or has some interesting thing going on. And you probably get dozens of emails a week. How do you sift through those to figure out A, what the good story is, and B, if it's even real or not?
Right. Well, I mean, so yeah, I get tons and tons of people telling me their stories and their ideas. Now it's mostly on Twitter, and people will pitch you. And I usually listen to the story a little bit, but I can tell pretty quickly whether it's something that I'm even remotely interested in, because it can't just be a great story. I mean, there are a lot of great stories out there. It has to be internationally compelling. One sentence, it tells you that everyone's going to want to hear this story. It also has to be something that I have access to. So whoever's telling the story has to have unique access to whatever this story is. And it's got to be really instantly recognizable. Like if it takes me more than a sentence to explain this story, I'm not going to be able to sell it. I'm very commercially minded in terms of the projects that I pick. I always sell them as a movie before I sell the book. So similar to what happened with The Social Network and with 21, I've got the movie locked up before the book. And that's just the way it works with me. So in fact, my past sort of 15 books, I've sold on proposal to Hollywood, then sold the proposal as a book, then written the book, and then attempted to develop the movie. So the story has to really lend itself right away to some sort of big Hollywood feature. Otherwise, I'm not going to be interested at all. So that can really weed out 99% of the stories that get pitched to me almost instantly. Because even though, it might be a great story, it might be dramatic, you might have this awesome, idea or whatever, but if that doesn't have those elements, it's just not for me. It might still make a great book, but it's not the kind of thing that I would write.
So,
yeah.
So you get an email from Eduardo, or was it from Eduardo or one of his friends?
It was Eduardo's best friend, who was still a Harvard senior.
Okay.
And the email started off, it said, "My best friend founded Facebook and no one's heard of him." And that to me was instantly like, wow, okay. Facebook was growing very quickly. It wasn't huge, but it had 500 million users at the time. And I'd known of Zuckerberg and I'd never heard anything else. And so I was really intrigued by the idea of this drama between these, people that becomes this billion-dollar company that I also felt was going to change the world. I really felt even then that Facebook was a real move to the online world that we were about to get into, that I wanted to write about it. So that really to me was immediate. And then when I met Eduardo, he walked in, he had a beer, and the first thing he said was, "Mark Zuckerberg fucked me." And, that's a great opening. You're just like, all right, I got to hear the rest of this story. And that's before Zuckerberg had fucked everyone else. So
right. He's a serial fucker.
Right. But back then, no one had heard a story like that about Zuckerberg. At the time, Zuckerberg was boy genius. Nobody knew anything else about him before that movie came out. So yeah, it was really compelling. It was a great pitch, and I was kind of blown away by it. Now, Eduardo, truthfully, was using me. He was actually in the midst of this lawsuit, and the only reason he was talking to me was because he thought he could get Facebook to settle with him by threatening the idea that he was talking to a writer. he did not ever expect me to write a book. He never thought we would get to that point. And when it leaked out on the internet, my book proposal, Facebook settled with Eduardo for $5 billion. And on the top of the settlement agreement, it says you may never speak to Ben Mezrich again, because they were trying to cut off this book and stop it before it happened. And, Eduardo cut off all contact with me. He moved to Singapore. He broke up with his girlfriend at the time because it was my wife's best friend he was dating, and got his billions. But I was still able to write the book because I had enough information at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah,
he really got fucked too. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was like he owned 34% of Facebook, and then he got his shares diluted down to 0.03% or something. Is that?
Yeah. Had the book not happened, he would have gotten very little, and now he's worth $9 billion. So at the very least, he should send me a gift basket.
Yeah, like a nice gift basket, or like give you like a cheap way into the metaverse when Mark Zuckerberg takes over the world.
Exactly, right.
So when you're doing your due diligence for these, you obviously have to talk to a bunch of different sources. Do you feel like most of the time in the book you have to find the antagonist and protagonist? And in this case, it's obviously Mark Zuckerberg that people are, looking at in this new light, that he's maybe not just a boy genius, but he's a little shrewd and self-involved, or whatever the case may be. Do you get a chance to talk to Mark Zuckerberg and these guys that know they're going to be hey, I'm going to be the heel of this? And how does that conversation go?
Yeah, it's tough. So you got to try and talk to everybody, right? And so I spent 6 months trying to get Mark to sit down with me, tons of back and forth with him. Eventually, he got to the point where he let me send him a bunch of questions and he refused to answer them. He knew I was talking. It wasn't Eduardo as much as the Winklevi twins. He did not like that I was talking to the Winklevi twins, as he was, in this legal battle with them about Facebook. And in the end, he refused to talk to me. And when the book came out, he called me the Jackie Collins of Silicon Valley. He said it was all lies. And then he went on Saturday Night Live and was the cover of Time magazine. So in the end, it did work out for him, but he was not pleased with it at all. When you write a book, you try and interview every side of the story, but there are people who just aren't going to talk to you. And in the end, I think he should have talked to me. It would have been a worse book, honestly, if he had, because his point of view wasn't the same point of view that Eduardo had. But I feel it's a very true story from the point of view of the characters we're telling it from. That's how Eduardo felt it happened. That's how the Winklevi twins felt it happened. Mark disagrees. In Mark's view, the Winklevi twins, had some little company that he didn't care about. Eduardo just gave him a few bucks and then disappeared. Mark feels that, the story is different. And that's fine. That's his way of telling it, and he can tell it however he wants. But I think it's a very true story. In a lot of my books, there are people that I'm interviewing, and while I'm interviewing them, I know they're not going to look great. And that can be tricky because you want to get the story out as true as possible. You don't want to screw anybody, but sometimes you're talking to someone and you kind of know they're the bad guy in the story. And that's just part of being a writer, I guess. But my books are pretty much, softball in that respect. I'm not trying to out anybody, ruin anybody. I really just want to tell a great story. And so my goal isn't really to sort of, drag anybody through the mud. But that being said, if you read my newest book, The Antisocial Network, about the GameStop drama, there's certainly characters in there that don't come off well and aren't thrilled about it. So, that sort of thing happens.
That was the GameStop big, that's a pump and dump that happened on Reddit or something, right? Or there was a forum.
Well, it was I don't know if I would call it a pump and dump. Basically, it was a massive short squeeze where a whole bunch of people bought GameStop to drive the stock up and to squeeze out this Wall Street hedge fund that was attempting to short, this beloved company that makes video games or sells video games. And so it's a crazy story that sits at the heart of the American economy in a way, about how we've gamified the stock market to such a degree that a big group of people on Reddit can manipulate GameStop to the point where it was worth as much as GE. It's a really wild story, and it's going to be an awesome movie. We're making the movie over the next year. It was a fun book to write for sure.
When you find these stories that you just go, man, this is a movie, I have to write this story. Do you have to procure the rights to it, or can anyone just kind of are you in competition with other writers to get to the finish line?
So so you don't have to procure rights to a true story. I mean, it's nonfiction, it's real. Life rights to individuals, the movie needs. A book doesn't need that. But if you're going to make a feature film about someone, they not for public figures. So for instance, for the Facebook story, nobody's life rights were involved. These are all public figures. You can tell anything you want about a public figure. For a private individual who isn't a public figure, Like 21, those characters sold their life rights to the studio. It's not usually the book writer that's involved in that conversation. It's usually the producers at Hollywood go in, and you are in a race with other writers if it's a very timely story. So something like the GameStop story, Netflix is working on a movie. There's a couple of other books that are going to come out next spring about it. So that was more of a race. Something like 21 or the Social Network were not races because nobody else knew those stories. So if you have access that other people don't, you're not really in a race. So yeah.
So were there any stories that you'd ever heard or you were pitched and you just missed the boat on, or that you passed up on, and then in hindsight you were like, oh, that was a really good angle on that?
That's a great question. So I have been pitched stories that I didn't take. I was, remember those kids in Thailand who were stuck in a cave?
Yeah.
The kids came to me, as a group. And I considered it, I almost did it. I think there's a movie coming out next year about it. I ended up not writing the book for a variety of reasons. One of them, I just, I didn't want to fly to Thailand right then and go spend a month in Thailand. I was once approached by Charlie Sheen's people at the height of his craziness. I remember that. And my wife was like, there's no way you're spending a year hanging out with Charlie Sheen to write a book. I didn't write that one. I'm not usually like a rip from the headlines kind of writer. So it's not usually like there's some big story and I want to be first in to write that story. There have been stories that I've heard that I thought, oh, I could have written a great one. The Wolf of Wall Street, which by the way was a great movie. I knew Jordan and the main character, and he was going to write his own book, but I definitely was like, I would love to have written his story. Thought it was an awesome story. So there are stories like that where I think I could have done a great job with it. But in general, I have to be pitched. I want someone to come to me, and I'm lazy, first of all. I'm not like going to dive out there and chase a story that everyone else is chasing. I'm going to write a story because it falls into my lap. And so that's how it's worked in the past. Yeah.
So you've had a couple of books about the Winklevosses, and obviously the most recent one, it has a good friend of mine in it too, is Charlie Shrem. He's a business partner of mine on some stuff. And Bitcoin Billionaires, a fantastic book. And if anyone hasn't read it and you're into crypto, you need to read it. So that picks up obviously at the end of the drama from the fallout of the legal situation between the Winklevoss twins and what's Satan's name again? Mark Zuckerberg. Thanks, Vinny. Mark Zuckerberg. Sorry, Mark Zuckerberg. I'm gonna get sued. I feel like that's so. Side note: when the Winklevosses sued Charlie Shrem, Mark Zuckerberg sent him a letter. He's like, "Welcome to the club." One of the two people that got sued by the Winklevosses. But so how did you come across the story of the Bitcoin billionaires, and how did that develop?
Yeah. So basically, the Social Network came out, and I had spent a lot of time with the Winklevi in writing that book, and kind of lost touch with them. They were the bad guys in the story. The guys row off into the sunset at the end. I never expected to hear from them again. And then I was reading the New York Times, and I saw that headline that said, the Winklevoss twins are the first Bitcoin billionaires. And it kind of blew my mind because you don't really see second acts like that. You don't usually see people as part of two separate revolutions. And so I reached out to them, and I knew about Bitcoin. I didn't have any Bitcoin. I had been told about Bitcoin. A lot of people were like, you should write about Bitcoin, but I wasn't interested because it seemed very boring to me at the time. I mean, it was like the word blockchain, I hate. The whole idea of this sort of, invisible wall. I just didn't get the whole thing. But I went out to New York and met with them, and they really sold me on not just that Bitcoin was going to be this revolutionary form of currency or whatever you want to call it, but also that their story was just incredible. I mean, they were just sitting on a beach in Ibiza because nobody in Silicon Valley would take their money after Zuckerberg had essentially blacklisted them from investing. And this guy walks up to them, related to Charlie, and said, "Have you guys ever heard of Bitcoin?" And I was very turned on by Charlie's story as well, because I think he's amazing. I think his story was just really cool and poignant and compelling. And between the twins and Charlie, there's an incredible story there about the origins of Bitcoin, or how it got to where it is today, and where it went from this libertarian, anarchistic, kind of shady thing to becoming this revolutionary moment in the financial world, and something that now we're all talking about. I was blown away by the story in every respect, and the twins were were generous with their time. And basically I sat with them for about a year, just going over the story with them. And then I met with Charlie, I met with a bunch of other people in the industry, and wrote that book. And it was a fun book to write, and we're going to make an awesome movie about it. And yeah, so that's where Bitcoin Billionaires came from. Really, you don't see people struck by lightning twice. And I definitely think the Winklevi twins, you know, whatever you think of them, they were in position twice now to be a part of something really enormous. And that just doesn't happen often. And these are guys that, you know, you look at and you think, you make a judgment of them immediately, because how could you not? I mean, they're 6'5", identical twin, Olympic rowers, you know, from Greenwich, Connecticut. They went to Harvard. They're everything that we're sort of trained to see in one way. But then they also are into Bitcoin, which is almost the opposite of that, right? It's this, you know, libertarian, scruffy, come from nowhere, science and math based thing. So that juxtaposition was really dramatic to me.
So at this point in your career, is every book that you write something that you only write if it's going to be a movie, or you feel like it has a strong potential to be a movie?
Yes, I won't write a book if I do not think there's a movie potential. And I sell the movie before I write the book. And I won't write a book if I don't sell the movie. So if I write a book proposal and I send it out there and it just doesn't sell, I would not write the book. Because my belief at this point is that, you know, we want to consume our stories in a variety of ways, and books are just one piece of that. It's a platform to something much, much bigger, and a bigger way to tell the story. Television as well. It's not just features. I mean, streaming television, features, those are all kind of encapsulated in storytelling now. And a book is just one part of it. I love books. I'm a book writer. That's what I do. But I think that movies and television is where the majority of us consume our stories. So yeah, that's something I set out to do with each project.
Have you ever thought about skipping the book and just writing a script for one of your movies?
Yeah, so I am writing. I have a new book coming out in February called The Midnight Ride, which is a thriller. It starts with a card counter, so you'll like that part. A card counter in Boston who discovers a secret going back all the way to the Revolutionary War. It's based on, I wrote a novella for the Boston Globe during the height of the pandemic. They came to me and asked if I would serialize the novel, basically write a chapter a day for 20 days. And it was this really wild, exciting project where literally I was writing a chapter a day. And by the end, 250,000 people were reading it every day in the Boston Globe. And so it's very Da Vinci Code-y, it's fiction. And anyways, I sold the movie to Amblin and Spielberg, and I wrote the screenplay for that. So I have written a few screenplays at this point, and I'm going to do more of that. And I'm going to be working on a big NFT screenplay, which is related to this NFT project that I'm doing. So yes, I do write movies as well, but my real sort of, you know, history is in books. And so what I've done successfully so far are big books that have turned into movies. I would like to write scripts that become movies as well, but I have yet to get one made. So
you're writing something about a non-fungible token. So it sounds like you went down the rabbit hole of being a little bit more involved in crypto.
Yeah. So what happened was I was really intrigued by NFTs. I'm fascinated by this sort of intersection between the physical world and the digital world. And, you know, like you were saying about kids playing video games, you know, my son would rather, you know, for the holidays, get a present of a clothing for his Fortnite character than real clothing. To kids, you know, NFTs make absolute sense. The digital world, the metaverse is already here, right? And so for me, NFTs are this intersection that has incredible ramifications for artists and creatives and people in these fields. And so what I'm doing is I'm launching a line of NFTs where if you own the NFTs, you're going to have a shot at owning half of my screenplay. So basically, the NFT owners are going to own a piece of the movie that I'm writing about NFTs. And I think that this is going to be sort of an experiment to see where this can go. And so, yeah, that's something I've been really delving into. I do think this is a revolutionary thing. I'm always looking for origin stories of something that I think will change our lives. And I do think NFTs are a starting place for the whole metaverse of where we're going to go. The idea that you can own something uniquely that's also digital and virtual, which goes back to crypto and Bitcoin, obviously, but it's a very powerful thing that I think we're just getting the start of.
Do you think NFTs are going to play a pivotal role in things like writing, entertainment, movies, music?
I absolutely do. I really, really do. I think it's a great way for an artist to sort of engage with their community, but also to create art without having to go through these centralized, monsters like studios and publishers and stuff. And I think that that is a future that's coming. I don't think we're there yet by any stretch. Right now, I see it more almost as like a fan club or a way for your group of people to communicate and get together. But that's what it's all about. It's about communities. It's about forming communities, about shared interests. And I think that that's what we're seeing with meme stocks, in the GameStop story. We're seeing with crypto. We're seeing with NFTs. We have this real interest and need to gather together with like-minded people over something. And I think there's a real power to that, that NFTs unlock in a big way. And so, yes, I'm really intrigued where this is all going to go. And that's why I'm sort of dipping my feet into it.
Have you started to take any of your salary in Bitcoin in any capacity?
Yeah, I wish I did. I wish I had. When I wrote Bitcoin Billionaires, Bitcoin was at 3,000, and I had been offered the movie rights in Bitcoin and had turned it down. And had I taken it, I would be completely retired right now, obviously. So, I haven't yet, but I certainly am open to the offer. If anybody wants to buy my next movie in Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything like that, I would happily take it.
When is your NFT project coming to fruition where people can go out there and maybe on OpenSea?
Well, there's a Discord site already up. And so that's where we're going to put the information. We don't have a specific drop date. The first drop's going to be in the next few weeks. And it's going to be 3 drops. First drop, and then the second drop will be a free drop to people who bought the first, and then a third drop. The first drop is around meme stocks and imagery, based on the stuff that I just researched. The second one, more revolving around Bitcoin and billionaires, and then the third drop around Vegas. And the people who own all 3 drops get a piece of the screenplay, a token in the screenplay. And then I'm going to write the screenplay over the next 6 months. And so the community will be a part of that. And there's also all these other things like one-on-one, poker sessions and things like that. I'm really into poker as well now. So lots of fun things going along with that. So
yeah, I know you had some online, some discussions with the online poker community. And I know that, I used to play in Poker Stars back in the day before it got annexed.
That was controversial. I wrote a book called Straight Flush about the absolute poker guys and who all became fugitives when it became. It's really funny talking about this now when online gambling is suddenly legal, right?
Right.
Suddenly there are billion-dollar companies doing the same thing that these guys were doing, and now they're fugitives running around the islands of the Caribbean. Yes, I dipped my toes into that world to write that book, and fascinating story. I mean, these guys were legends and evil legends in some respects. But running around the islands with guns under their pillows and things like that, when online poker was this very shady world. Yeah.
Was that Howard Lederer or who was that? That was.
He's in the story as well, but
okay.
The main character was Scott. Gosh, I can't remember the book. It was what was his name? Scott Tom. Can't remember the main character's name. Who ran Absolute Poker.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but yeah, they all like
the fraternity who moved their fraternity to Costa Rica to launch an online poker site. And they were making $1 million a day. I mean, crazy money, but it was illegal. I mean, because the US decided that poker was illegal online. And so suddenly one day what they were doing was legal and the next day it wasn't. And they essentially became fugitives overnight. It was a wild story.
And there were a ton of players that had money like lost or locked up too, and they couldn't access these funds.
So basically when the government essentially seized it, they just disappeared, and anybody whose money was there just was gone overnight. It's a crazy scene for sure. And so a lot of people got very mad. And on that, a lot of people were mad I wrote the book. And there were all these, back and forth on Twitter or whatever about glamorizing, the bad guys in the story. But I really feel like when you tell a story like this, that's part of the game, right? You want to read the fun, exciting story. And sometimes the characters are not the good guys. But it's still great to get their stories out there.
So Bitcoin Billionaires is being turned into a movie. I've talked to Charlie a couple of times about it. Do you have any idea in terms of the casting, who's going to play who, the Winklevoss twins, or I know?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that Armie Hammer is a difficult cast right now.
Yeah,
he's had some problems. I love Armie, by the way. I had a great relationship with Armie when we did Social Network. He's like a super nice guy. But it's going to take an interesting and unique type of actor to play a Winklevoss twin. And I don't know yet, what direction that will go. We're very close to something very big and interesting happening with that I cannot announce yet. But I will say that I do believe the movie will be made this year. I mean, over 2022, and it's going to be really, really, really amazing.
Yeah, I tried to tell Charlie, I go, you don't have any idea like the trajectory change of how once, like right now you're a huge name in the crypto space, but once that movie comes out, like that made Zuckerberg and nobody knew the Winklevoss.
Oh yeah, I mean the Bitcoin Billionaires movie will be just enormous for Bitcoin, but it'll definitely put Charlie on a map in a very different way, and an intriguing way. I really think he's one of the most sympathetic characters in the story. You know, the Winklevoss twins, I think, are amazing, incredible people who've done amazing things. And Charlie, you know, went through some troubles, but is you can identify with Charlie in really, you know, interesting ways. Super smart guy who got caught up on the wrong side of it, and then, you know, found the right side, I think. Yeah, I'm really into the idea that Bitcoin started in a much darker place. And I know some people now try and erase that past, but I don't think you should. You know, America started in a dark place, right? The revolutionaries, and in my new book I talk about this a lot. The revolutionaries were smugglers, and you know, they were not good people necessarily. And Bitcoin started Silk Road, and you know, the sort of anarchistic view of what Bitcoin was supposed to be is part of Bitcoin's history. And I don't think it's something that should be erased or sanitized. And I think Bitcoin Billionaires will bring out where these OGs came from and how Bitcoin started. I think that's a big part of the story.
Charlie was saying, and if this gets him in trouble, I'll edit it, but that I don't know if they were talking to, or there was some potential maybe of Seth Rogen playing Charlie, which I think would be perfect to play Charlie.
I love that idea. I haven't heard that. So maybe, you know, Charlie might know things I don't know. I know that there are some very big names attached to the project at this point, that it has not been announced yet. So I do know that there's some stuff going on, but I'm not privy to all the information. That's a great casting idea. I thought Jonah Hill also would be an awesome Charlie. I can think of a couple people who would be amazing. But again, that's usually beyond my power as the writer. That's usually the director. I will get consulted on that sort of thing. But you know, I don't have the power to make decisions like that. But that would be really cool though.
You mentioned Silk Road, and then another guy who a lot of people in the crypto space, Ross Albrecht, I'm going to mess up his last name, but the founder of Silk Road, who's in prison for life. Was the Silk Road story ever something that you thought about writing?
So, you know, I have a great Silk Road scene in Bitcoin Billionaires, and there's definitely will be covered in the movie a little bit. You know, I think it's a great story. I don't think it's right for me to write. I think there was a book already that came out, right? Wasn't there?
I think there's a movie on Netflix about Silk Road. Yeah, so I think there was a book.
It's not something that hasn't been covered. It has been covered. It's not really my kind of thing, and I like the story. I think it's an intriguing thing, you know, and I think it could be controversial about what you think, you know, the correct punishment would be for something that he had done. You know, life in prison seems pretty harsh, right? Considering, you know, he started a website, but there are other factors in there that people debate about whether they're real or not. So I don't know enough to really speak on whether there was a contract killing or all of that stuff going on. But you know, there is a fascinating story there, but I feel that it's been covered. So usually I'm looking for stories that also haven't been told yet. And that's a tricky part, a big story that we all recognize, but that hasn't been told. And I do kind of feel like that story's been told. And I do have it in Bitcoin Billionaires. There's a very exciting scene of you know, when he gets arrested and stuff like that. But yeah, it's probably not for me. But you know, listen, I'm sure someone could write another great book about it. I'm not, you know, gonna step back and say that someone couldn't. It just probably wouldn't be the kind of thing I do.
Do you think that, I mean, if you look at in the last 10 years, easily one of the most polarizing figures that have been out there that have been in the public spotlight is Donald Trump. Have you ever thought about writing anything in that space?
You know, listen, so I would have to be approached by someone who wanted to tell me a story that hasn't been told a million times. I'm not a political person by any means. I have no political opinions or beliefs at all. I'm kind of like a Muppet. That's what my brothers call me. I'm like one of the Muppets. The Muppets have no political views, except maybe that eagle had a lot of views, but I don't really care one way or the other. I want the world to be happy and fun, and I just want to be able to sit in my room and write my books. and everyone else can make the decisions about everything else. So I haven't had any political opinions whatsoever. That being said, if someone came to me with this incredible story set in that realm, I would write it. And so I don't know what that would be. I can't even imagine what that would be at this point. I've always, I don't know. I think there's something intriguing in the story between what's the son-in-law's name? I just lost his name.
He was you put me on the spot.
Ivana and
the sons, the
right.
husband. Yeah, I know.
Right. The fact that him and his brother are polar opposites. There's something in that family that I think is an intriguing story. I don't know if you know anything about it, but his brother is like a billionaire liberal.
Jared Kushner, or is it Jared?
Yeah, Kushner. Yeah. The Kushner family story, I think, is a wild story. If one could get into it, because he's on one end and his brother's on another end, and then the family history, there's some crime in it. There's all of this stuff that goes back in New York politics and New York finance. So that's something I'm intrigued by, but I have no access to. So that for me, really, access is an important part of it. And again, it goes back to my laziness, but I really need, someone to come to me and say, I want to tell you my story, and their story is incredible. And then I can research all around it and find all the other characters and that kind of thing. But I really need that initial thing. So when people come to me and are like, here's a great story, it might be a great story, but if you're not the guy that it happened to, that doesn't help me that much, because right. I'm not a journalist by training. I'm not going to go dive in there. And I have friends who are newspaper people, and their jobs are incredible, what they do. And they run out there and they're on their feet, just trying to, hunt down lead after lead after lead. And that's just not my forte. My forte is dramatizing a story that someone tells me. And so that's what I need.
So what's the next project that everyone can look forward to Ben Mezrich working on?
Yeah, The Midnight Ride is my next book. So I hope people pick that up. Comes out February 22nd. And so this is, early days, but it's I'm hoping it's my Da Vinci Code. And I'm writing the sequel to it and the movie as well. And I'm really thrilled for people to read that, because I think it gets back into a secret history of where our country was founded and why that hasn't really come out before. And I think it's going to blow some people's minds. And then in NFTs, my NFT drop, if people are interested in that, they can go on Discord and find, Ben Mezrich NFT there. And then I don't know what my big next nonfiction story is. We're making the movie to the Antisocial Network, which is the GameStop story. And that movie will be in production come this spring. But beyond that, I'm always looking for the next story. So, if you've got a great story, you can find me on Twitter and tell it to me.
I appreciate it, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I'll definitely check out the NFT stuff, and we'll throw up all your handles, and I'll check out your next book, The Midnight Run. And I can't wait to see the movie come out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.